What's going on, you guys? It's Sir Scrub here, bringing you some more Scrub tier Yu-Gi-Oh! Before we get into today's video, please leave a like and subscribe and let me know what you think down in the comments section below. But with no other BS needed, let's get straight into today's topic. The greatest, the strongest, the best. These are all titles we have all sought after in our lives, whether it be in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or other interests, hobbies, or work. It's what drives some people, being the very best in their chosen field. And today we'll be talking about my opinion on the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks throughout this game's history. So before we begin the actual countdown, let me lay down the criteria I used for this list. The things I took into consideration were as follows: how prominent the given deck was within any format, the amount of hits the deck has suffered on the ban list, its impact on Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole, and finally the length of time the deck was competitively viable. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump both feet into this. Number 10. For my first pick, I went a little unusual. Shocker, I know. But I actually chose Goat Control. Ah yes, the namesake of the famous Goat format. We all know this deck, it's one of the classics. It has obviously defined an entire format and is the calling card of the classic Yu-Gi-Oh! era. Using the card Metamorphosis to turn measly little goat tokens into the powerful Thousand Eyes Restrict, which back during the DM era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Could be a powerful turn in momentum, considering card advantage was a little different back then. The ability of Thousand Eyes Restrict to absorb up the opponent's powerful monsters like Summon Skull or Breaker the Magical Warrior and turn their attack values against your opponent was a power play back in the day, and I just couldn't pass up on this deck and not give it the respect it deserves. Number 9. Burning Abyss. Another unique pick, and one I'm betting not a lot of you expected to see. As a member of the Duelist Alliance Triangle format, it didn't exactly define a format like some of the other decks on this list. Hell, it wasn't even the best deck of that format. However, this deck never fucking dies. Even now, 4 years later, this deck can adapt with new cards like the Danger Monsters and of course Sekka's Light to adapt and evolve into a viable deck. That alone has to give this deck a seat on Yu-Gi-Oh! Olympus. But that's without taking into consideration the deck still has some of its power cards on the FNL list. With Seer, Beatrice, and Graf still limited, the deck is still somehow able to compete. The meme is real. BA is definitely on the top 10. Number 8. Gladiator Beast. Of course this Colosseum conquering deck would make the list somewhere. This is definitely one of the best decks in this game's history. Usurping the powerful Dad Return, along with some help from the FNL list, to become the deck to beat alone should qualify this deck for the list. And this wasn't just a one-off event. This deck won 6 Shonen Jump Championships back to back. This is absolutely one of the greatest decks to grace this game, and it is sincerely sad to see this once powerful competitor power crept into submission. Number 7. Sky Striker. Oh, this deck right here. Oh boy, are we all tired of this fucking deck. However, that being said, it just shows how powerful this deck is. It has been tier 1 since release, and before the limiting of Hornet drones, it was a highly splashable engine. Not to mention some of the powerful cards this deck possesses like Engage, Widow Anchor, and so on. I'm not going to spend length on this deck since we all know it well, but definitely deserves its place on this list. Number 6. Teledad. This deck is one of my personal favorites within Yu-Gi-Oh! History. It's kind of like a tug of war between Dad variants and Glad Beast. This deck took all the power back with the release of Synchro Summoning. Using the Destiny Hero engine as well as Emergency Teleport for Krebons to make Synchro monsters and adding the Dad Cherry on top solidified this deck as the strongest deck of its format. With Dad and Emergency Teleport both still residing at limited status to this day, should speak enough for the power of this deck. Number 5. Spiral. Alright, here comes the slew of tier 0 decks. So we will start with what I believe to be the weakest of these upper echelon of decks. Spiral was one hell of a deck when all of its pieces were 3. Machine Dupe and Quick Fix usually ended in a full-on extra link. This was also fairly early on in the Vrains era, showing just how powerful the new link mechanic is, as well as giving this deck the chance to flex its muscles. With the deck taking up a massive 77% of some top cuts, It's definitely one of the strongest decks in this game's history, as well as having 3 of its most crucial pieces limited, just goes to show how much it took to put this deck in check. Number 4, Fusion Sub-Zoo. Alright, before I get into this, I just want to go ahead and get this out of the way. Fuck Zodiac. I hate this goddamn archetype to the core. That being said, it is absolutely one of the strongest decks ever printed. Now, I am specifically highlighting Fusion Sub-Zoo because this particular variant of the deck was adapted to a newly semi-limited rat pier, which many thought would limit the deck's capabilities. With the deck taking up anywhere from mid 70 to 80% top cuts and lasting for an obscene amount of time, as well as being one of the most splashable engines this game has ever seen. Even with pure Zoo taking up the majority representation, most of the other decks competing against the pure variant ran some kind of Zoo engine, proving that it, unfortunately, deserves to be high on this list, though admittedly my personal bias would not allow it to pierce top 3. Number 3. Alright, time for all of you to rage. This is my last controversial pick. Spellbooks. Now, before all of you leave, hear me out. I have 3 words for anyone who doubts this entry being this high. Spellbook of Judgment. This card is one of the most insane cards to ever be printed for any deck. If you don't know what this card does, go and look it up and read it. It is absolutely insane. It single-handedly gave this deck the ability to stand up to one of the most broken decks of all time, and it will absolutely always have to be banned. And for that reason alone, I have to give Spellbooks top 3. Number 2. Speaking of Spellbooks, I'm putting Dragon Rulers at number 2. This pick is a shock to no one. No one sane will argue that this is absolutely one of the strongest decks to grace the TCG. Going back to my Greek gods reference, this is absolutely the Poseidon of Yu-Gi-Oh! Currently. This deck's ability to constantly generate powerful rank 7 monsters, as well as use the graveyard like a second hand, and use the banish pile, immediately sticks out. Those traits alone make it difficult to deal with, but then when we take a look at the deck's legacy, every single card of this archetype has spent time on the FNL list, with every single one of the big rulers being currently banned. No other deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! History can say its whole archetype is banned, and that alone should earn it this spot. However, it's not number 1. Number 1. The honor of being number 1 can only go to one deck. Only a single strategy in the history of this game can even come close to claiming this title. Pepe. Oh god, Pepe. With this deck slaughtering the meta and forcing Konami into an emergency forbidden limited list, there is no debate that this is single-handedly the strongest deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. When a deck makes Konami get off their ass and do something on our time and not theirs, it speaks volume to its strengths. This deck's ability to manipulate and abuse the pendulum mechanic to get basically a free soul charge every turn, as well as create some of the strongest boards this game has ever seen. It is absolutely one of the strongest deck Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever seen, and in my opinion, I hope to God it stays that way, because I don't want to see something that may be stronger than Pepe. But that's it. That's all I've got for my top 10 strongest decks of all time, you guys. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Please leave a like and subscribe to see more content like this, and feel free to share this video with a friend. But most importantly, don't forget, be a scrub.